Hey everybody, I am Sarah. Welcome back to another episode of Overkill Rewind. This is a show where you guys all vote in the top 5 heavy metal albums of the year and we review them. To help see all of your votes clearly and give all the albums a good assessment, I'm wearing my glasses. This year, we're going back to a fantastic informative year for heavy metal. That year is 1976. It's a year when heavy metal was truly cementing its importance in the history of rock and roll, and a year where a lot of the albums that came from it are since now considered to be proto-metal, heavy metal, and rock and roll. No matter how you define these records, they've all had a very formative impact on the history of heavy metal. We do videos like this all the time, so if you don't want to miss out on all the action, make sure you hit subscribe. Even though I wasn't yet born in 1976, it was one of my favorite years for heavy metal. I assume a lot of you watching also weren't born yet either, so let's talk about what was going on. Now, of course, I have to remind you of the most important event of 1976, Star Wars. Started filming in Tunisia. Thanks, Dad, for the original VHS. It is completely worn out. 1976 was an interesting year for heavy metal. Deep Purple sadly broke up. Guitarist Tony Bolin died of an overdose at the age of 25. Richie Blackmore, who Bolin had replaced, was busy on his new project Rainbow with singer Ronnie James Dio. A ton of great bands formed, except Diamond Head, Heavy Load, Saxon, The Obsessed, and hell, the almighty German band Running Wild. And finally, Fast Eddie Clarke joined Motorhead. It was a good year for heavy metal. Now, let's get into those top 5 albums of 1976 as voted by you. Coming in at number 5 is a band where my strongest memory associated with them was this little movie that came out in 1999 about some teenage boys and some rock and roll. That's right, coming in at number 5 is Destroyer by Kiss, released on March 15th by Casablanca Records. You all know Kiss. In 1976, it was made up of the iconic lineup of the Star Child, the Catman, the Spaceman, and the Demon. Destroyer is the 4th studio album by Kiss and is somewhat of a departure from their first 3 records. Thanks to producer and co-writer Bob Ezrin, the band ended up integrating more musicians into the mix during the recording process, and not only that, he actually forced them to take some musical theory classes while they were writing the record. They would later describe working with him like being in a musical boot camp. Altogether, Destroyer is a bombastic record, and despite Rolling Stone writing in their original review that there's not a memorable guitar solo on the album, the dual guitar work on Detroit Rock City has gone down in history as being instantly recognizable. It's enough to get anybody's fist in the air. That song is a fucking banger. Meanwhile, songs like the Peter Criss written and sung track, Beth, ended up alienating a lot of fans, but it also got Kiss a ton more fans when it became an unexpected hit months after the release of the album. All told, Destroyer sold incredibly well, giving Kiss their first platinum album. At the time of release, critics panned Destroyer. Once more, in that original review, Rolling Stone wrote that Kiss still lacks that flash of creative madness that could have made their music interesting, or at least listenable, adding that gimmickry is the best Destroyer has to offer. Of course, the popular perception of Destroyer has changed quite a bit since its release, and this album is now considered one of the milestones of heavy metal. While Destroyer does have multiple memorable tracks, it also has a couple dullards, including Sweet Pain and Do You Love Me? It's also important to note that Rolling Stone's review was on the money about one thing in particular, and that is gimmickry. Kiss has gone on to infamously merchandise their band out the wazoo, as these Pez dispensers in front of you may show. They have also lent their name to custom coffins, toothbrushes, custom mini vehicle wraps, Christmas stockings, and pretty much anything else that they could slap their logo and or faces onto. Between their highest selling years, Kiss grossed $119 million. 52 million of that came from merchandising alone. Blah. Now, I have to admit, the spectacular tackiness of Kiss's merchandising has nothing to do with the music on Destroyer. It's a great album, and for those reasons, I'm giving it 4 skulls out of 5. Coming in at number 4 is Thin Lizzy's immortal album, Jailbreak. It was released via Vertigo internationally and via Mercury in the United States on March 26th, 1976. Jailbreak is Thin Lizzy's 6th studio album and is their breakout. And on this album, they truly solidified their dual guitar harmony approach, and they also played way stronger to band leader, bassist, and vocalist Phil Lynot's strengths. The result is the band's biggest album, and it features 2 of their biggest hits, which are, of course, Jailbreak and The Boys Are Back in Town. Jailbreak was quite well received, and it won NME's Best Single Award for 1976. It did receive some mixed reviews, but it went on to achieve gold status in the UK, the United States, and in Canada. Jailbreak is a gem, and it really cemented Phil Lynott as a phenomenal lyricist and vocalist. It also inspired legions of guitarists who were inspired by Scott and Brian's intertwined interplay. Speaking of that twin guitar sound, here's a never-before-seen interview with Thin Lizzy about how they developed it.
I keep telling everybody this was not a premeditated thing. And what had happened is we were in the studio. Brian Robertson had gone out to just lay this kind of lone single line. Brian went out and he recorded the line. We came back in to listen, and the engineer had accidentally left like a millisecond delay on his guitar. So when it came back, it looped back and it harmonized itself coming back. Yeah. And of course he was going, "Oh geez, man, I'm sorry about that. Let me fix that." And we were going, "No, wait a minute. Let's have a listen to this. That actually sounds kind of cool." So we had him play it back. We thought, well, let's do this for real. We've already got the line. I'll learn the harmony to it. So I sat down, picked out the right notes, went out there and did the harmony to it. And everybody thought, wow, that's a cool bit. But we never thought of it as, well, this is going to be the sound. There was a review that came out and it said, that patented Thin Lizzy twin guitar sound. And I thought, oh man, we've got a sound.
Jailbreak is an awesome album with excellent instrumentation and awesome emotional variants. It was followed by the very strong Johnny the Fox. So you could say 1976 resulted in some damn good Thin Lizzy music. For those reasons, I'm giving Jailbreak 4.5 skulls out of 5. The next band is one that it took me admittedly some time to appreciate, but now they are near and dear to my heart. Incidentally, this band played the only concert that I ever went to with my dad, so hey Dad, you're cool. And because the dad loves it, I think you should probably already know who they are. That's right, it's the 4th studio album by the almighty Rush. That album, of course, is 2112. It was released on April 1st, 1976 by Anthem Records. Incidentally, this album was recorded in Banger's hometown at Toronto Sound Studios. Also, not so incidentally, we made a documentary about them.
What's the motivation to keep doing it?
Chicks.
Before 2112, Rush were at a stage where they had poor sales, declining audiences, and were critically reviled, and they were really close to giving up. And instead of giving up, they went into the studio and they pushed harder and became more prog than ever. With 2112, they wrote a concept album about the city of Megadon that is controlled by priests who control these supercomputers, based on, and I quote, the genius of Ayn Rand. The story ended up being quite controversial. In fact, the band was accused by some by being right-wing extremists, commentary that really offended Geddy Lee, whose parents had survived the Holocaust. Otherwise, the album was a fan and critical success, and it resulted in Rush being called by Circus Magazine Canada's heavy metal answer to Kiss and Zeppelin. It features Geddy Lee's distinctive warbling voice, Neil Peart's fantastic drumming, and Alec Lifeson's great guitar work. Lifeson's beautiful, awesome guitar work is particularly great on the delicate song Discovery, especially when it's interlaced with Geddy Lee's vocals. There are all these perfect little moments that are sprinkled all throughout the record. You can't forget the chorus to the Temples of Syrinx, the iconic opening riff to A Passage to Bangkok. That riff has also been iconically used by the Vapors in their track Turning Japanese. It's been used in Kung Fu Fighting, and also in a Bone Thugs and Harmony track called Mr. Bill Collector. Altogether, 2112 inspired a whole generation of metal musicians to consider the concept album and to up their musical game. Because it features jaw-dropping musicianship and has an incredibly robust sound that was delivered by only 3 people, and it showed an international audience that Canada is good at heavy metal, 2112 gets 5 skulls out of 5. Now for the top 2 albums. I was kind of surprised to see who got which billing on this, because both of these albums that are upcoming, you know what they are, but you don't know who's number 1 and who's number 2. Let's find out. Spoiler! Judas Priest came in at number 2 for their magnificent album, Sad Wings of Destiny, which was released on Gull Records on March 23rd, 1976. Judas Priest formed in Birmingham, and then over the next couple of years, they cycled through a ton of members. When they did consolidate, it was with the operatic vocalist Rob Halford and with the dueling guitarist Glenn Tipton and KK Downing. I don't think there's much more that I can say about Judas Priest or about Sad Wings of Destiny that hasn't already been said. This magnificent book, Mean Deviation, 4 Decades of Progressive Heavy Metal, they had a really great review of the record, which I'm gonna read you now. Priest's Sad Wings of Destiny arrived just as Black Sabbath's musical Wanderlust was fading. The time was right for a revival or reinstatement of what Sabbath had started and what Rush and Rainbow were carrying into the future. And truly, Sad Wings of Destiny is a reinstatement of what heavy metal is and what it should be. Parts of this album just make the hair rise up on my arms. The shrieks in Victim of Changes, the shred-tastic beauty of The Ripper, the dastardly call and response of The Tyrant. This album is just pure gold from start to finish. Initially, this album had poor sales but strong reviews, and I think that those reviews have just become stronger and stronger as everyone has collectively realized the monumental impact that Judas Priest has had on heavy metal as a whole. All of the incredible guitar work, for the incredible vocals, for everything, this album gets 5 skulls out of 5, and fuck, if I could, I would give it 10 skulls out of 5. That's right, the number 1 album of 1976, as voted by you, and quite frankly, also voted by me, is Rainbow's immortal hit, Rising. It was released on May 17th, 1976 by Oyster and Polydor Records. Rainbow Rising is the second studio album by Ritchie Blackmore and Company. Following the release of their magnificent yet substantially more bluesy debut, Blackmore fired everyone in the band, save for Ronnie James Dio. He then hired the truly top-notch drummer Cozy Powell alongside bassist Jimmy Bain and keyboard player Tony Carey. Into the studio in Munich they went, and less than a month later, Rainbow Rising was a result. Not only is this album Ritchie Blackmore's finest hour, but it's also Ronnie James Dio's finest hour, which is saying quite a bit for both of them because both of them have a discography that is super fucking impressive. The addition of Cozy Powell was a stroke of genius. I mean, if you listen to a song like Stargazer, which I truly think is one of the best songs ever written, the addition of the Philharmonic Orchestra just brings that song into incredibly transcendent heights, and the lyrics, they're just perfect. Dio is, and I quote, singing about a wizard that cripples civilization by attempting to build a stone tower to the stars. That is fucking awesome. I mean, alongside that magnificent masterpiece and Tarot Woman are a couple of funny songs about sex. Do You Close Your Eyes is a little bit cringy in my opinion. It's the only song that I don't completely love, but I never skip it because it's fucking Rainbow. This album is 33 minutes of sonic bliss. It's untouchable. The impact of this album was immediate, even if Rolling Stone was characteristically off base about it, calling it disjointed, grandiose, and humorless. Seriously, Rolling Stone did not get heavy metal back in the day, but altogether, the press and fans were super impressed by this album, and it has gone on to be voted the number 1 heavy metal album of all time by numerous polls, and indeed, in 1981, Kerrang voted it just that. If you couldn't tell from my general excitement, frazzledness, frizzy hair, multiple outfit changes, and everything else, I'm really fucking stoked on Rainbow. This album is getting 5 colors of the rainbow out of 5. And now for the honorable mentions. These albums, while not in the top 5, did get 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Side note, I'm doing these honorable mentions with some Rolling Stone reviews thrown in because reading Rolling Stone reviews in preparation for this was fucking hilarious because They really didn't get heavy metal, and they were frequently very insulting about it, and it's almost kind of comical, so holy shit, calm your tits, Rolling Stone. Coming in at number 6, AC/DC High Voltage, a band that Rolling Stone described as a band whose live act features a lead guitarist leering menacingly while dressed in a schoolboy beanie and knickers. AC/DC has nothing to say musically. 2 guitars, bass, and drums are all goose-stepping together in mindless 3-chord formations. Holy shit. Number 7, Led Zeppelin, Presence. Glowing reviews for that one. Number 8, Aerosmith, Rocks. And I quote, "The material is Rock's major flaw because it's mostly pale remakes of the earlier hits." Number 9, Blue Oyster Cult, Agents of Fortune. Too bad that this one didn't get in. It is great, but it's not their best. And then at number 10 is Black Sabbath's Technical Ecstasy, which is going to go down in history as the album with a cover which features 2 robots potentially pissing on each other. Now for the albums that should have been included and were not. I don't know what the fuck is wrong with you guys that nobody voted Scorpions Virgin Killer into the top 10. This album is awesome. I get it. The alternate cover art sucks. The original cover art sucks harder. Another album that I would have loved to have seen in the top 10, although it probably would have been Overkill because we already talked about Thin Lizzy, Johnny the Fox. 2 great albums in a whole pool of awesome albums. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. 1976 was an amazing year for heavy metal, and I'm so stoked that I just got to spit talk about Rainbow and Rush and everybody else. Make sure that you hit subscribe so you can vote in the next Overkill Rewind. And make sure you leave your remarks in the comments about what we missed and what you think actually should have been number 1. Thanks. Bye.